Venus eliminates scores of mercenary terrorists, destroys their weapons and qualitative operations in various provinces. And Syria's representative at the United Nations, Syrian government's role as a partner to the United Nations Humanitarian Response Plan is undeniable. And Russia's permanent representative to the UN, Churkin, stresses that political settlement is a precondition for improving humanitarian situation in Syria. Good afternoon, this is news in English from the Syrian Hour television in Damascus. Syria's permanent representative to the United Nations, Dr. al-Jaafari, asserted that the Syrian government is an integral part of the Humanitarian Response Plan signed with the United Nations Office for the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs. More about that in the following.
الحكومة السورية جزء لا يتجزأ من ما يسمى خطة الاستجابة الإنسانية التي وقعناها مع أوتشا.
Syria's permanent representative to the UN, Dr. al-Jaafari, said that Serbia has been following this humanitarian response plan for over 2 years in cooperation with the UN. So any talk about Syrian government non-cooperation is completely incorrect and untrue. Al-Jaafari asked, can UN Under-Secretary General for Humanitarian Affairs Valerie Amos tell us what she did for thousands of Syrian families that are now homeless and that fled their villages due to the criminal practices of armed groups there? He asserted that the Syrian government is doing the large share of humanitarian work, something which Amos is well aware of, wondering why she attempts to deny this fact in her report to the Security Council.
Secretary General for Humanitarian Affairs, Mrs. Amos, has been to Damascus many times. She met with the highest authorities at the Ministry for Foreign Affairs in Damascus, including the minister himself. The Syrian government appointed as a liaison officer to deal with the OCHA activities in Syria, a diplomat from the ministry with the rank of deputy minister, as a sign and gesture from the Syrian government that we are extremely keen interest in respecting our commitments and facilitating the task of OCHA's activities in Syria. You may be aware that today's briefing was called for by the British delegation, and you may have also noticed that calling for a meeting of the Security Council to deal with the exclusive aspect of the humanitarian situation prevailing in Syria is a kind of selective approach with the provisions of the presidential statement to which Mrs. Amos referred a few minutes ago. The presidential statement, for instance, speaks about the criminal, appalling activities of al-Qaeda and Jabhat al-Nusra in Syria, and calls for the Security Council members to deal seriously with these crimes in order to make pressure on those who are supporting these armed groups to refrain and desist from their criminal activities. But for some reasons, the British delegation did not see this aspect of the presidential statement and has been dealing selectively with the content of the presidential statement. We don't mind seeing Mrs. Amos briefing the Council on the humanitarian situation in Syria, but we would like her also to take into consideration the overall content of the presidential statement. I have noticed a few minutes ago when she was answering two questions actually, one on the sanctions and the other one on the criminal groups operating in Syria. She answered by saying that she doesn't have information, or that the UN did not take any stand so far, or that no reports confirming this or that has been published yet. All that is not accurate. In the second committee, there is a resolution adopted every year on the negative impacts of the unilateral economic measures taken by some member states against some other member states. And the second committee has been adopting this resolution for decades. It deals exclusively with refusing any unilateral economic coercive measures. This is the name. Here we are not talking about sanctions. Sanctions are imposed exclusively by the Security Council. Any other so-called sanctions taken by any member state, unilaterally speaking, are not sanctions. They are unilateral coercive economic measures. This is the UN terminology. So we have an arsenal at the United Nations in the second committee as well as in the sixth committee on this very important issue, including the blockade on Cuba that we will discuss very soon. This is part of what we are talking about, but it is dealt with accordingly by the sixth committee. So Mrs. Amos is not very well briefed by her aides on how far the UN system is deeply involved in refusing this kind of irresponsible and provocative behavior by some member states. Then, as I said at the beginning, the British delegation could have called for a meeting of the Security Council to deal with the presence of the terrorist and criminal and armed groups in Syria, operating for the benefit of Saudi Arabia or Qatar or France or Turkey or whatever. One of you raised this matter. So why dealing exclusively with one aspect of the presidential statement? Although it is important, we don't mind dealing with it. We are acknowledging and we are saying that yes, we have a humanitarian situation prevailing in the country, but we should know and say what are the root causes of this humanitarian situation. Mrs. Amos, in her briefing to the Council, mentioned that some neighborhoods in the countryside of Damascus are under siege. Yes, but she didn't say why. She didn't say that these neighborhoods are under siege by the Syrian army because there are armed groups in these neighborhoods taking the civilians as human shields. She should have said that. She should have explained to the members why she is making this remark. She is right on the remark, but she is not right on the explanation of the root causes of this remark. So this kind of neutrality is not a pure neutrality. It's playing with the cards of those who are fishing in the murky waters with regard to the situation in Syria. The members of the Council had a fruitful discussion. They went to the substance, contrary to the selectivity approach taken by Mrs. Amos. The whole aspect of the situation in Syria was discussed. The members are much more aware and advised by the events taking place in Syria about, the real picture of the situation over there. We have sent so far to the Secretary General as well as to the Security Council members almost 440 letters, 440 letters explaining in details all aspects related to the Syrian crisis, including 147 letters related directly to the terrorist activities of al-Qaeda and Jabhat al-Nusra and the other armed groups, which are a kind of offshoot of al-Qaeda, all operating in Syria with the Saudi money, the Turkish logistics, the Qatari media coverage, etc., etc., etc. But as if, some members have never heard about this and they don't want to acknowledge this very important fact. Syria is a victim of interference by some member states into its domestic affairs. This has been a crystal-cut reality and crystal-cut facts to everybody. Nobody could deny it anymore. Nobody, including those who are supporting these armed and terrorist groups, are now denying their links with these groups. The first page of the New York Times today, I'm sure you have seen it. It's about the electricity cut in Damascus. The first page of the New York Times. She said it, Mrs. Amos, but she didn't say who did it. She said Damascus was cut off electricity yesterday, but she didn't say who did it. She should have said that the armed groups detonated the gas line that conducts the gas necessary to generate the energy, electrical energy. This is what I mean by my remarks. She should have gone to the substance. She should have briefed genuinely the members about the situation in the Middle East. However, Mrs. Amos, as well as any other UN officials, are always welcomed in Damascus. We brief them regularly, on a regular basis, on the situation, and we are extending the maximum support from the government to their operations.
Can you confirm the number that Mrs. Amos talked about, and why aren't you issuing visas?
We are issuing too many visas to too many people. We are a sovereign nation, like any other nation. We have our own reasons sometimes to deny visa to this individual or to that individual. This is an integral part of the principle of sovereignty of any member state in the United Nations. However, we have extended visas to hundreds of people working for OCHA. If there are any minimal cases here and there, that wouldn't affect the overall picture of our cooperation with OCHA.
The Grand Mufti of the Republic, Ahmed Badruddin Hassoun, stressed that the international parties have begun to realize the reality of events in Syria and their consequences, which will spread to the whole world. In an interview with the news correspondent in Moscow, Dr. Hassoun pointed out that the reason behind the retreat of those is not for the sake of Syria, but because they realized that the fire which they ignited was spread to reach them. He added that Syria has warned of extremism and has been fighting it for years, which is why extremism could not win in Syria. In related context, and for his part, Russia's permanent representative to the United Nations, Vitaly Churkin, has asserted that the humanitarian situation in Syria could not be considerably improved without reaching a political settlement for the Syrian crisis. Following the Security Council's meeting, Churkin said that there is a tendency for the mutual work with the aim to achieve progress in the humanitarian domain, but many members of the Security Council understand that this could not be achieved without reaching a political settlement to the issue. The Turkish journalist Tulhan Tikilioglu has said that there are 4 hospitals along the Syrian-Turkish border funded by Saudi Arabia where members of the so-called Free Army and Jabhat al-Nusra are being admitted and treated. An interview with the Turkish CNN, Tikilioglu expressed astonishment upon seeing 4 buildings on which it was written hotels, but that she found out upon entering one of these hotels that they were hospitals for treating the wounded among the terrorist groups fighting in Syria. She further added that the Turkish areas close to the Syrian border are in utter chaos in terms of arms smuggling and so many armed men, which will be counterproductive for Turkey itself. A car bomb blew up while terrorists were preparing it near Osama bin Zaid Mosque in Souq Wadi Barada in Damascus countryside. An official source said that the explosion caused the killing of many terrorists and casualties among the citizens, in addition to material damage in the site. One of the injured citizens said that the explosion took place before the end of Friday prayers, causing the collapse of the mosque's 2 entrances and casualties among citizens, in addition to material damage to the shops and parked cars in the site. A military source said that terrorist gatherings were eliminated in the villages of Mahin, Al-Hafir, Starko Street, Al-Khanqin area, in Rastan Burqa, in Al-Hula area, and in Kisin, in addition to destroying boats loaded with weapons and ammunition. Army has also destroyed with the Syrian army has also clashed with armed terrorist groups who tried to infiltrate from Ad-Dar al-Kabira into the villages of Al-Khalidiyya and Al-Ghasibiyya in Homs countryside, while other army units destroyed terrorist gatherings near Al-Amal Hospital in Jurat al-Shayyah and Al-Qasur and Al-Qarabish neighborhoods in the city of Homs. In Hama countryside, army units, in cooperation with the citizens, seized a truck loaded with rockets and various kinds of weapons in the village of Al-Arusha in Salamieh countryside. In Daraa, army units killed many terrorists and injured others as they also confiscated Israeli-made missiles, machine guns, rifles and communication devices. A military source said that an army unit clashed with terrorists in the city of Daraa, killing many terrorists, while other units confronted an armed terrorist group that attempted to infiltrate into Al-Khazan area in Al-Harak town, killing or injuring all of its members. In Lattakia, army units destroyed a thermal missile hideout and 2 weapons and ammunition caches as they eliminated armed terrorist groups in Lattakia countryside. According to a military source, the source clarified that the bodies of the terrorists Ayman ad-Din al-Julani, one of Jabhat al-Nusra leaders, and a leader in Al-Qaeda-linked Islamic State of Iraq and Sham, Abu Ahmad al-Iraqi, were identified among the dead. In Al-Rashidiyya and Al-Hawiqa areas in Deir ez-Zor provinces, units of the Syrian armed forces repelled attempts by the terrorists to attack checkpoints of the army, eliminating a number of them and confiscating their criminal tools. Moving to Al-Hasaka province, where units of the Syrian Arab Army, in cooperation with the units of the National Defense Forces, destroyed a number of boilers used by the terrorists to refine oil illegally in the province's eastern countryside. And with this, we end our news for today. Thank you for watching. For more details about Syria and the region, and to view this bulletin again, you can always visit our website in English, www.syriaonline.sy. Now to the latest in business and market news with Nariman Qassam, but after a short break.